And welcome back. Continuing to work on the right wing. Instructions have you look at the flat brackets and just verify that they're straight using a vice grip and a soft impact mallet. So I take a straight edge piece of metal and line it up with each of the edges just to verify, how straight they are. These ones weren't too bad at all. There's only a slight curve to them, and it just took a couple hits with the mallet to straighten them out. Now, the one thing you want to be careful about is that you don't over manipulate the piece and cause it to bend the other direction, and have to keep hitting it back and forth to get it straight. This is obviously, as you work metal like that, it'll weaken the structure of the metal. But like I said, the 6 pieces that I had here wasn't too bad. They were all fairly straight, but you want to make sure that they're as straight as you can get, because you don't want to cause binding as the flaps are using that pivot point. So less stress on the flap actuator. So now I'm going through and just attaching the brackets, the flat brackets, to the ribs. As you can see there, you have the rib, then the flat bracket itself, and then the doubler I was speaking to earlier last video. And you'll use that doubler as your match point to drill all the number 30 size holes in the rib. And then eventually I'll go through and apply primer to all of those points and deburr them later on in this video here. So the next step that the instructions have you do is to trim off the rear flange of the number 14 rib, the outer rib. And that's what I'm doing here, getting a straight line and marking it with a permanent marker. The instructions tell you to keep the radius, and so you want to be careful that you don't trim off too much. But that's what I'm doing here, just using a Dremel to cut off the end flange there and then deburring that. I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of that is. Obviously we'll find out later in the build. But then the very next step is to go through and remove all of the bolts that are in the spar where your ribs will attach to. And there's a significant number, both top and bottom. As I'm going through here, I did make sure that I kept all the top bolts in one bag as I was storing them, and all the bottom bolts in a separate bag, just so I don't mix it too. And here you see, I fast forwarded to the end of pulling these bolts out. The ribs get attached with rivets throughout the webbing portion of the spar, and then at the top and bottom of the rivet attach point, it uses the bolts, which you'll torque into place. Now these are AN3 bolts, and so the torque spec on those with the locking washer is about 28 inch-pounds, so it's not a whole lot of force to get those bolts in place. And you obviously want to be careful not to over torque them, but they're pretty easy to snap, so you got to be careful of that. Now here I am going through, like I said earlier, deburring the flap joints, going through and just making sure that there's no burrs anywhere for when I rivet those together. And also, as I've discussed before, my thoughts on priming is that it's not actually necessary. The metal, for the most part, except for where it specifies, the metal is anodized, and so it's already got an anti-corrosion property to it. Now it does talk to, like on the spar, it specifically says to prime the locations where you have countersunk, because you remove that anodization, that protection. So there are some places where the instructions tell you to go ahead and prime just because you're removing that protective coating. But for the most part, it's just not necessary. But I figured I would at least prime the contact points where metal touches metal. That way, one, it'll help in a resale value if I ever do decide to sell this, because there are some that just won't buy an airplane without some kind of anti-corrosion primer. But I don't think it's necessary to prime every square inch and just add weight for no reason. So I kind of compromised and am just putting primer, like I said, on the contact points. It will provide some extra, benefit, I guess, but it's just damned if you do, damned if you don't. So going ahead and doing that. Now the instructions do have you, when you get ready to install and rivet the ribs, it tells you to keep the most inboard 10-11 left or right, depending on which wing you're working on, rib out while you're riveting the other ribs in place. Not exactly sure why the instructions have you do that, but the way that it words it can be difficult. It took me a while of reading over the instructions just to kind of verify which rib it's actually talking about, and it is the number 2 rib. So now just getting everything put in place, getting ready to match drill all the forward flanges of each of the ribs to the spar, and also match drilling where the bolts will go through. Now my spar, this is the right spar. It was difficult getting a lot of those bolts out. I don't know if they were just seized or the heat made the metal expand. Like I said, it is Phoenix. It's still 110 degrees, 105 degrees outside, so maybe that's what it was. But a lot of the bolts were difficult to remove, and so it has you go through and match drill all of the bolt holes through, and then also you end up final drilling the flanges, because there's no hole in the flange for where the bolts will go through. And so it tells you, and you'll see me here in a minute, using a number 12 bit, go through and then use a wood block on the flange side to support the flange so it doesn't bend, and match drill all of those holes and create the hole in the rib. And then following that, you go through and you match drill all the attach points on the flanges to the webbing of the spar with a number 30 drill bit. And that's what you'll see me do here in just a second. Now obviously anytime you're drilling into the spar, you want to be really careful. It's easy to mess things up if you're not paying attention to the step that you're supposed to be on, and that's not a cheap piece to replace if you mess it up. So anytime you're drilling into this thing, make sure you're double checking what you're supposed to be doing, and that you understand the step that you're about to work. So here's like I said, using that wood block to apply pressure to the bottom end of the flange, and then using a number 12 bit to match drill and then creating a hole in each of the flanges of the ribs. So far in this build, like I said, this stand that I have here, I'm going to end up modifying this because I'm quickly getting to the point where I'm going to need a cradle on one end. So more than likely, what I'll end up doing is just modifying this and kind of cutting this down to make it so I can use it as a cradle. Right now I have, as of making this video, I have the spar flipped from what you see here so that all the ribs are standing up, and it makes it a little difficult to reach the top end of the ribs to attach the rear spar. So definitely gonna have to relook and rethink how I'm gonna make this, but I think that's probably the better way to go. So now going through and just match drilling all of the number 40 holes on the flanges of the spar for the tabs on each of the ribs there. And then now just taking everything down, getting it ready so I can deeper all the holes that I just match drilled. So just like you do on every other piece, get everything together, match drill everything, then take it apart and deburr. There's a whole lot of deburring through this process. Not the most fun thing, but a necessary evil, so they say. So this is where I'm going to let this video run out. I'm, like I said, in the process of working on the rear spar, which means that I'm working on the aileron attach points, which is one of the new, or the service bulletin that has been released due to some cracking in other models of aircraft. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and I'll be putting that video out here pretty soon. For those that continue to watch these videos, I appreciate it. If you get a chance, hit that like button for me, and if you haven't already, subscribe and then hit that bell and you'll get notification anytime I release a new video. Again, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time around.